When Tyler Brooks found himself pinned against the lockers, with his arm twisted behind his back, begging Sofia Rivera to let him go, while tears streamed down his face, everyone at Riverside High realized that the quiet new girl with the military bearing wasn't someone you wanted to mess with. What had started as Tyler's typical intimidation routine had turned into his most humiliating moment in 18 years of life. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation that changed the entire social order at Riverside High, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, give this video a like, and if you're new here, subscribe to hear more stories about people who refuse to be victims. Now let me take you back to how this all unfolded. Sofia Rivera had walked through the doors of Riverside High School on a Monday morning in October, carrying herself with a posture that immediately set her apart from her new classmates. While most 17-year-olds slouched through hallways with their phones glued to their faces, Sofia moved with purpose, her back straight, her eyes alert and constantly scanning her surroundings. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore simple jeans and a plain black t-shirt that somehow looked more put together than the designer outfits many of her peers sported. Tyler Brooks noticed her immediately. At 18, and built like the linebacker he was, Tyler had ruled Riverside High's social hierarchy through a combination of physical intimidation and carefully calculated cruelty. He had a talent for identifying the students who wouldn't fight back, the shy ones, the different ones, the ones who just wanted to get through high school without making waves. New students were always his favorite targets because they hadn't yet learned the unspoken rules of survival at Riverside High. Sofia represented everything Tyler loved to target. She was alone, obviously trying to navigate an unfamiliar environment, and she had that careful, watchful demeanor that Tyler interpreted as weakness. What he didn't recognize was that Sofia's alertness came from years of living on military bases around the world, where situational awareness wasn't just a good habit, it was a survival skill. During lunch that first day, Tyler made his move. Sofia had found an empty table in the corner of the cafeteria, spreading out her schedule and a map of the school while she ate. She was methodically planning her routes between classes, timing how long each walk would take, identifying alternate paths in case the main hallways were crowded. It was the kind of strategic thinking that had become second nature after years of adapting to new bases, new schools, new environments. Tyler approached with his usual swagger, flanked by two of his regular followers, Jake Morrison and Brett Chen, both football players who enjoyed basking in Tyler's reflected dominance. "Well, well," Tyler announced loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear. "Looks like we got ourselves some fresh meat." Sofia looked up from her papers, her expression neutral. She took in Tyler's aggressive posture, the way his friends positioned themselves to block escape routes, the anticipatory silence that had fallen over nearby tables. She had seen this exact scenario play out on 3 different continents and in 7 different schools. "I'm sorry," Sofia said politely, her voice carrying just a trace of an accent that spoke of time spent overseas. Tyler grinned, interpreting her polite tone as submission. "You're sitting at my table, new girl." Sofia glanced around the cafeteria, noting that there were at least a dozen empty tables available. This wasn't about seating arrangements, this was about establishing dominance. She had watched countless bullies use this exact tactic to mark their territory and identify their victims. "I don't see your name on it," Sofia replied calmly, returning her attention to her schedule. The comment sent a ripple of surprise through the nearby tables. Students at Riverside High didn't talk back to Tyler Brooks. They apologized, they moved, they submitted. They didn't calmly point out the obvious flaws in his territorial claims. Tyler's grin faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Everything in this cafeteria belongs to me, including this table. Now move." Sofia set down her pen and looked up at Tyler again. This time, her assessment was more thorough. She noted his height and build, the way he carried his weight, the positioning of his feet. Most importantly, she recognized the look in his eyes, the look of someone who had never been seriously challenged and had no idea how to handle real resistance. "No," Sofia said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Students at surrounding tables had gone completely silent, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented at Riverside High. Tyler's face flushed red. In 4 years of terrorizing underclassmen, no one had ever simply refused his demands. "What did you just say to me?" Sofia stood up slowly, gathering her papers with deliberate calm. She was several inches shorter than Tyler, probably 60 pounds lighter, but something in her movement made Tyler unconsciously take a step backward. "I said no," Sophia repeated, her voice still perfectly level. "I'm not moving because you told me to. If you want this table, you can wait until I'm finished with my lunch." Tyler felt the eyes of the entire cafeteria on him. His reputation, built over years of successful intimidation, hung in the balance. He couldn't let some random new girl make him look weak in front of the whole school. "Listen, you little—" Tyler started, reaching out to grab Sophia's papers. That was his first mistake. The moment Tyler's hand moved toward her belongings, Sophia's entire demeanor shifted. The polite, slightly wary new student disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with deadly precision and absolute confidence. Tyler never saw it coming. Tyler Brooks's hand had barely made contact with Sophia's papers when she moved with a speed that defied comprehension. In one fluid motion, she caught his wrist, stepped to the side, and used Tyler's own forward momentum against him. Before Tyler could process what was happening, he found himself bent over the cafeteria table, with his arm twisted behind his back, at an angle that sent shooting pain up to his shoulder. "Let go of me," Tyler gasped, his voice already climbing toward panic as he realized he was completely immobilized. Sophia's grip tightened slightly, sending another wave of pain through Tyler's trapped arm. "You grabbed my property without permission," she said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "That was a mistake." The cafeteria had erupted into chaos. Students were jumping up from their tables, phones appearing to record the impossible scene of tiny Sophia Rivera controlling the school's most feared bully. Jake Morrison and Brett Chen stood frozen, unsure whether to help their friend or pretend they didn't know him. "Please!" Tyler's voice cracked as he struggled against Sophia's hold, only to discover that every movement sent fresh waves of agony through his shoulder and wrist. "You're hurting me." Sophia adjusted her grip with the precision of someone who had performed this exact maneuver hundreds of times. Tyler's struggles stopped immediately as the pain intensified. "I'm applying pressure to several nerve clusters in your arm and shoulder," Sophia explained in that same eerily calm voice. "The more you fight, the more it's going to hurt. I suggest you stop moving." Tyler's face was pressed against the cafeteria table, tears of pain and humiliation beginning to stream down his cheeks. He could see dozens of students recording him, capturing what would undoubtedly become the most embarrassing moment of his life. The mighty Tyler Brooks reduced to begging for mercy from a girl who barely came up to his shoulder. "What do you want?" Tyler whimpered. "I want you to understand something very clearly," Sophia said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the silent cafeteria. "I am not your victim. I am not someone you can intimidate or push around. And if you ever put your hands on me or my belongings again, what happens next will be much worse than this." She released the pressure slightly, allowing Tyler to speak more clearly. "Do you understand me?" "Yes," Tyler gasped. "Yes, I understand. Please just let me go." "Good," Sophia said, but instead of releasing him immediately, she held the position for another few seconds, long enough to ensure that every student in the cafeteria understood exactly who was in control of this situation. When Sophia finally released Tyler's arm, he stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder and staring at her with a mixture of fear, confusion, and wounded pride. His usual swagger was completely gone, replaced by the cautious movements of someone who had just learned they weren't as tough as they thought. "How did you—" Tyler started, but his question was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Jackson, the vice principal, who had been drawn by the commotion. "What's going on here?" Mr. Jackson demanded, taking in the scene, Tyler clutching his shoulder, Sophia standing calmly by the table, and dozens of students with phones out recording everything. "Nothing, sir," Sophia said politely, sitting back down and returning to her lunch as if nothing had happened. "Tyler and I were just having a discussion about cafeteria etiquette." Mr. Jackson looked at Tyler, whose face was still flushed and whose breathing was labored. "Tyler, what happened?" Tyler found himself in an impossible position. He could hardly admit to the vice principal that he had been humiliated by a girl half his size while trying to bully her out of a cafeteria table. His reputation was already in tatters. Admitting the truth would only make it worse. I just twisted my shoulder wrong," Tyler mumbled, not meeting Mr. Jackson's eyes. "It's fine." Mr. Jackson wasn't buying it, but without anyone willing to explain what had actually happened, he couldn't take any official action. "All right, everyone back to your lunches. Show's over." As the vice principal walked away and the cafeteria slowly returned to its normal noise level, Tyler found himself facing a new reality. The girl he had targeted as an easy victim had just demonstrated that she was anything but helpless. More importantly, she had done it in front of the entire school, destroying his carefully cultivated image of invincibility. Jake Morrison and Brett Chen approached cautiously, unsure how to react to seeing their leader so thoroughly dominated. "Tyler, man, are you okay?" Jake asked quietly. Tyler looked at his friends, then at Sophia, who was calmly eating her sandwich and reviewing her class schedule as if the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. He realized that everyone was waiting to see how he would respond, whether he would try to reassert his dominance or accept his new position in the school's hierarchy. For the first time in his high school career, Tyler Brooks chose retreat over confrontation. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, walking quickly toward the cafeteria exit with his followers trailing uncertainly behind him. Sophia watched them go, then returned her attention to her papers. She had work to do, and Tyler Brooks was no longer her problem. By the end of the school day, the video of Tyler Brooks being subdued by Sofia Rivera had been shared on every social media platform used by Riverside High students. The footage, captured from multiple angles by different phones, showed the encounter in crystal clear detail. Tyler reaching for Sophia's papers, her lightning-fast response, and his subsequent begging for release. But it wasn't just the speed of Sophia's reaction that had people talking. It was the professional precision of her technique, the calm way she had maintained control of the situation, and the obvious expertise behind her movements. Students were beginning to ask questions about the new girl who had single-handedly dethroned the school's most feared bully. The answers came during fifth period, when Sophia found herself called to Mr. Jackson's office. "Sophia, I need to understand what happened in the cafeteria today," the vice principal said, gesturing for her to take a seat across from his desk. "Tyler's story doesn't add up, and I've seen the videos that are circulating." Sophia sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap. "Tyler attempted to force me to give up my table and then grabbed my personal property without permission. I defended myself." "Where did you learn to defend yourself like that?" Mr. Jackson asked directly. "My father is Colonel James Rivera, U.S. Army," Sophia replied matter-of-factly. "I've lived on military bases my entire life. Self-defense training isn't optional in military families, especially for dependents who move frequently." Mr. Jackson felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Military families were known for their discipline, their situational awareness, and their preparedness for conflict. "What kind of training have you had?" "Krav Maga primarily," Sophia said. "Also some jiu-jitsu and basic hand-to-hand combat techniques." "My father believes that his family should be able to protect themselves, whether he's deployed or stationed stateside." The vice principal was beginning to understand that Sophia wasn't just a regular teenager who had gotten lucky. She was essentially a trained combatant who happened to be attending high school. "Sophia, I have to ask, did you intend to hurt Tyler?" "No, sir," Sophia replied immediately. "If I had intended to hurt him, he would be in the hospital right now. I used a restraint technique designed to control without causing permanent damage. Tyler was never in any real danger, though I'm sure it was quite painful." Mr. Jackson leaned back in his chair, processing this information. In 20 years of school administration, he had never dealt with a situation quite like this. "How many schools have you attended?" "Riverside High is my 9th school," Sophia said. "Military families move frequently. So I've learned that every school has students like Tyler, bullies who target anyone they perceive as vulnerable. Usually, I try to avoid confrontation, but Tyler made that impossible." "Have you had to defend yourself at other schools?" Sophia's expression remained neutral, but Mr. Jackson caught a flicker of something, perhaps weariness, in her eyes. "Twice, once in Germany and once at Fort Campbell in Kentucky. Both times the situation was resolved quickly and without serious injury to anyone involved." The vice principal was beginning to understand that Tyler Brooks had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He had targeted someone with extensive combat training, years of experience dealing with bullies, and the confidence that came from growing up in a military environment where strength and discipline were valued above social status. "Sophia, I want you to know that what happened today won't result in any disciplinary action against you. You were clearly defending yourself against harassment. However, I need to ask, are you going to have any problems with Tyler or his friends going forward?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "That depends entirely on Tyler's choices. If he leaves me alone, we won't have any further issues. If he decides to retaliate..." She let the sentence hang unfinished, but the implication was clear. As Sophia left the office and returned to her classes, word of her background began to spread through the school. Students who had grown up in the same town their entire lives were fascinated by someone who had lived all over the world, who had training they could barely imagine, who carried herself with the confidence of someone much older. Tyler, meanwhile, was discovering that his fall from grace was even more complete than he had initially realized. Students who had previously feared him were now openly mocking him in the hallways. His friends were distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone who had been so thoroughly humiliated. Worst of all, several students who had been his previous victims were now walking with their heads held higher, emboldened by the proof that Tyler Brooks was not invincible. During football practice that afternoon, Coach Martinez pulled Tyler aside after watching him favor his shoulder during drills. "Brooks, what happened to you today? You're moving like you're hurt." Tyler faced the same impossible choice he had confronted with Mr. Jackson: admit the truth and face further humiliation, or lie and hope no one would discover what had really happened. "I had a disagreement with the new girl," Tyler said finally, unable to meet his coach's eyes. Coach Martinez had already heard the rumors circulating through the school. "The Rivera girl? Tyler, please tell me you didn't try to bully a military kid." Tyler's silence was answer enough. "Son, let me give you some advice," Coach Martinez said, shaking his head. "Military brats aren't like regular kids. They've seen things, lived places, learned things that most people never will. They don't back down from bullies because they've dealt with real threats. You picked the wrong target." As Tyler walked home that evening, his shoulder still aching and his pride in ruins, he realized that his 4-year reign as Riverside High's top intimidator was over. The new girl, with the quiet confidence and dangerous skills, had changed everything in the span of 60 seconds. And tomorrow he would have to face a school where everyone knew that Tyler Brooks was no longer someone to be feared. The next morning brought a transformed social landscape to Riverside High School. Tyler Brooks entered the building to find himself experiencing something completely foreign: being ignored. Students who would have normally nodded respectfully or stepped aside now simply went about their business as if he were invisible. The fear-based respect he had cultivated for 4 years had evaporated overnight. Sofia Rivera, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a very different kind of attention. Students approached her with curiosity rather than fear, asking about her experiences living overseas, her military background, and yes, her self-defense training. For the first time in any of her 9 schools, Sofia was being sought out not because she was different, but because her differences were seen as impressive rather than threatening. "Is it true you lived in Germany?" asked Madison Wells, a junior who had been one of Tyler's previous targets. "For 2 years," Sofia confirmed, organizing her locker with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. "My father was stationed at Ramstein Air Base." "What was it like?" Madison pressed, genuinely curious. Sofia paused, considering how to explain the complexity of military life to someone who had never experienced it. "Different. You learn to adapt quickly, to make friends fast because you might move again in 2 years. You learn to be independent because your parents are focused on important work. And you learn to take care of yourself because help isn't always available." By lunch, something unprecedented was happening in the Riverside High cafeteria. Sofia found herself surrounded by students who wanted to sit with her, to hear her stories, to ask her questions. For the first time in her high school career, she wasn't eating alone. Tyler, on the other hand, discovered that his usual table in the center of the cafeteria felt uncomfortably exposed. Without his aura of intimidation, he was just another student, and not a particularly popular one. Jake Morrison and Brett Chen had found other people to sit with, unwilling to be associated with someone whose reputation had been so thoroughly destroyed. The shift in power dynamics became even more apparent during 6th period when Tyler encountered Lisa Chen, no relation to Brett, by the lockers. Lisa was a sophomore who had been one of Tyler's most frequent targets, a quiet girl who loved reading and rarely spoke up in class. For months, Tyler had made her life miserable with constant harassment, knocking books from her hands, making cruel comments about her appearance, and generally making her dread coming to school. Today, when Tyler approached Lisa's locker, something was different. "Move," Tyler said automatically, falling back on his old patterns of behavior. Lisa looked up from her books and, for the first time in months, didn't immediately comply. Instead, she glanced down the hallway to where Sofia was walking to her next class. "No," Lisa said quietly, her voice gaining strength. "I don't think I will." Tyler was stunned. Lisa Chen, who had never stood up to anyone in her life, was refusing his direct command. "What did you say to me?" "I said no," Lisa repeated, this time more firmly. You don't scare me anymore, Tyler. Everyone knows what happened yesterday. Everyone knows you're not as tough as you pretended to be." Other students had stopped to watch this exchange, sensing that they were witnessing another shift in Riverside High's social order. Tyler realized that his humiliation at Sophia's hands had created a ripple effect. Students who had previously been intimidated by him were now finding their own courage. "You think that freak is going to protect you?" Tyler snarled, his frustration boiling over. "I think," Lisa said calmly, "that I don't need anyone to protect me from you anymore. You're just a regular student now, Tyler, just like everyone else." Tyler found himself facing the same choice that had confronted him the day before: escalate the situation and risk further humiliation, or accept his diminished status. The problem was, he could see Sofia Rivera watching from down the hallway, her expression alert and ready. The message was clear. Any return to his old behavior would be met with swift consequences. For the second time in 2 days, Tyler chose retreat. As the weeks passed, Riverside High settled into its new normal. Tyler Brooks became just another student, his days of terrorizing underclassmen effectively over. Some of his former victims found their own voices, while others simply enjoyed the relief of no longer living in fear. Sofia Rivera established herself not as a replacement bully, but as something entirely different: a protector. Students who were being harassed began seeking her advice, not because they wanted her to fight their battles, but because they wanted to learn how to stand up for themselves. Her calm confidence became a model for others who had previously seen submission as their only option. 3 months after the cafeteria incident, Mr. Jackson approached Sofia with a proposal. "We're starting a peer mediation program," he explained. "We need students who can help resolve conflicts before they escalate. Would you be interested?" Sofia considered the offer. Throughout her military upbringing, she had learned that true strength wasn't about dominating others. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves and helping others find their own strength. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'd like that." As Sofia walked through the hallways of Riverside High that afternoon, she reflected on how much had changed since that first day in October. She had come to school expecting to blend in, to survive another transfer without making waves. Instead, she had found herself in a position to make a real difference. Tyler Brooks passed her in the hallway, his head down, his swagger long gone. He had learned the hard way that respect based on fear was fragile, and that there was always someone stronger, smarter, or better trained than you. Sofia had learned something too, that sometimes standing up for yourself meant standing up for everyone who couldn't. And at Riverside High School, that lesson had changed everything.